Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast. And unfortunately, you failed your 50-50 because we are off banner this week. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And this off banner, we're going to talk about Psycho-Pass, which Dave has suggested to me since I've never seen it before. So, Dave, why don't you take over hosting duties?
All right. So yeah, I wanted to talk about Psychopaths with you, Steve. So while I was watching Freerun, you had been watching Psychopaths. Now we we're looking at this, and I know Psychopaths has multiple seasons, and so what we ended up doing, we're only going to be discussing the first season today, which was 22 episodes. And so the concept of Psychopaths, the reason I was kind of interested in having you watch this one was I wanted to get your thoughts on the plot and the premise, and then maybe just dive a little bit deeper into the psychology of it and everything. But for those unfamiliar with Psychopaths, it essentially is how society, technologically advanced society, sometime in the future, has found a way to basically determine if people are going to commit crimes or not before they commit them. And it follows an investigator in the police force essentially doing that, and then things that unfold. So if you remember the Tom Cruise movie from back in the early aughts, Minority Report, it's similar premise, but a slightly different spin on it. So Steve, first let's just start with kind of a broad. After watching the first season, what were your takeaways? What were your impressions of the show?
So on a broad level, my takeaway was that unfortunately Psychopaths felt very. The problem is it sits next to other anime sci-fi greats like Ghost in the Shell, and I would even say to a lesser degree Cowboy Bebop and a couple of others. But Pat Labor would be another one. I think I'm pronouncing that correct. But there's a number of sci-fi, cyberpunk, dystopian stories that anime tells, and I just didn't. Unfortunately, Psychopaths was kind of running into the wind on this one. It didn't quite click with me. I did try and give it as best a shot as I could. I tried to keep an open mind. I didn't want to necessarily hold it. The fact that it's kind of sitting amongst giants against it, I think it at the end of the day, it set up an interesting central conceit that the elevator pitch that you gave of it's basically Minority Report with some tweaks is a solid one, but it just didn't quite work for me. I was interested in the fact that it immediately starts deconstructing its own dystopia, where it starts showing how this system just doesn't work and so on and so forth, like a societal system. It doesn't work, but it just never quite was able to crest the hill into something that I really loved. I will probably go into a rant a little bit later about specifically episode 11, because I think that's where it just burned a lot of my goodwill. But it had interesting ideas. I think I will have more fun discussing Psychopaths with you than I will have having watched Psychopaths, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? I guess let me start there so I can get a feel for you said all the descriptors here, but
Mm.
numerically, where would you place that on a scale?
I would probably put it on a 6 out of 10, not using an American grading scale of like 7 is a C, but like an actual bell curve.
Five being an average show, one being a terrible, awful
Yeah.
show, and 10 being the best show you've ever seen.
Yeah.
To clarify my scaling and grading.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a 6. A lot of that is based on the fact that it's very solidly animated. It doesn't have a lot of issues. 3D animation that exists in it wasn't too distracting. There was a couple instances of it, but overall it was from a technical point of view a very well put together show. The writing wasn't awful. It did well. I would say it's above average. As a show, it just doesn't. I have me specific quibbles that doesn't make it work for me. Would be the way, yeah. So I would say a
Okay.
6 out of 10.
Okay. Now, you mentioned how it was written and stuff like that. One thing you didn't mention that I did want to ask about music wise are So when you watch an anime, do you tend to skip like the opening credits, or do you actually listen to the opening credits at all and the closing credits, or do you just skip them completely, or do you like listen to them once and then skip? No.
No, good to know. My rule of thumb is listen to each version of it at least once. There's a couple cases where I will listen to it like every time if I really like it. In general, at least for the first intro, I don't remember if there were two, because again, there was a large gap between when I finished episode 11 and when I picked it back up again. But I remember watching the first intro and outro credits and enjoying them, but basically skipping through them, just trying to get through the content, if I'm being honest. At least here near the end of the series, I think from episode like 16 on, I just let it play. It was solid. There was a little bit of English, but it wasn't too bad. But I musically, it was good. I don't think I'd put it in like a top opening. Like the soundtrack wasn't something that I'd probably listen to just all the time.
Sure.
But I certainly have heard worse. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, I asked because I have two of the songs are on a playlist of mine of just like random collection of all kinds of music. But I have the Abnormalize song as well as another opening theme. I believe it's the opening theme from later in this first season. I think the group is called Carved in Stone, or maybe that's the name of the song. But those two would be the songs that I have on my playlist. So I was just curious, yeah, if you listen to those and what you thought. But now diving into the story itself, I know you said you have a little bit of a mini rant on episode 11. We'll get to that later on, but first I kind of want to talk to you about characters in terms of any characters to you that were very interesting, or any characters to you that you're like that didn't move the needle at all, or anything that stood out to you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to apologize right now. My note taking is much more broad and what's the term?
If you describe the character, I could
Yeah.
probably get you the name. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
If you have trouble remembering the name, just describe them. I'll try and get the name.
That's fair. So Spike Spiegel was a character that was very generic. He's the,
He's the main,
yeah,
Shinya, I believe is who you're referring to.
I believe. He's Spike Spiegel. Like, that's just his character. I'm sorry. He's just Spike. I believe Kanya is the female main lead.
Kane.
Akane was a character that I had roller coasters with. Again, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to kick her down the road a little bit because there's a conversation. Episode 11 is coming,
Sure.
baby.
Sure, we'll get there.
I would say the other two standout characters were the older detective with the robo arm, and again, just I guess for reminders for people who are joining us now and haven't maybe listened to the first episode, we do full spoilers when we are covering things in Off Banner, so just generic spoiler warning here. Old robot arm guy, his son, who is also a fellow inspector, at least at the beginning of the show.
So I believe there you are talking about Tomomi, I believe is his name, and the son Nobuchika Genoza.
Sounds right. I'll go with that. Those two were interesting. The older Tomomi was, I think, the more interesting of the pair, at least in season. I think he's set up. His son is set up as a interesting replacement kind of character in season 2. I can't confirm that because again I've only watched the first season, but it seems like that character will undergo more growth and be more interesting in the second one, because in the first season he's basically the standard like sergeant, hand me your badge and your gun, by the rules, etc., etc. But I think unfortunately for me, Psycho-Pass was not really a character study. It was much more sci-fi elevator pitch, high concept type show than it necessarily was the more Freerin style character study, close examination. It does occasionally dip into that, but I just don't think it does it well, in my opinion.
So looking at kind of, I guess, the premise or the concept, right, in terms of dealing with human psychology, right? Because there was a scene early on with the detectives where instead of eliminating somebody who is deemed a threat, and this was kind of like, I think, with the first bonding moment between Akane and Shinya.
Mhm.
So is that basically instead of deleting a person whose coefficient was in that range where the Dominator was enabling you to kill them, Akane says, no, this isn't the right, like, this isn't the right way. There's got to be, there's another way, or like the
Mhm.
circumstances are what's causing this. It's not the person type thing. And they end up listening. They don't kill him. That's kind of their first bonding experience. So in terms of like their interactions throughout the series, like how did that play out to you? And then I guess ultimately then this leads into episode 11. So kind of build us up to your thoughts on Akane and Shinya's relationship, and then when we get to episode 11, let's I'll just step away and let you get up on the soapbox.
Sounds fair. I like I said, I don't think I don't think the show does a very good job with character. So for the most part, the Akane and Shinya relationship is it felt very by the numbers. Again, Shinya he's Spike Spiegel. He doesn't have a lot of, unlike Spike, he doesn't actually have, I would say, as much depth. He's very revenge driven in that same way as Spike is, but he's not. He doesn't have the same depth to him. He doesn't have the same crunch. He's kind of the stoic, badass guy who wants to get revenge. And I do want to circle back a little bit to the initial first episode that you were hinting at, where to explain a couple things because it's going to come up later. It's going to be important when I kind of get on my soapbox here. The way in the world of psychopaths, the way that psychopaths works, which is a noun in their world, is a person's psychopath is basically a combination of their mental state, their aura, for lack of a better term, like their magical aura, and their level of criminality, essentially, like the odds that they will commit a crime. Here, I'm going to give the show a benefit of the doubt and basically go violent crime. It doesn't seem to be clear that there's any separation between violent crime and white collar crime, but they deal exclusively with violent crime in the show, so presumably that's what it's recording. It's impossible to tell because details are sparse on the ground in that regard. So the higher your psychopath number is, the more likely you are to commit a violent crime of some assortment, or just a crime in general, I guess. And so in Kane's first day on the job, there is a gentleman who apparently got scanned by a local scanner. It was found that his psychopath was higher than it should be, and he was basically told to get himself to a psychological center for help. He decides, no, I don't think I do want psychological help, or I don't really want to go to this essentially prison, as you find out, to get re-educated. I'm going to now go on a killing spree. And he ends up capturing a woman and abusing her physically, so on. And as a result of this abuse, her psychopath number goes up because, her mental state is, she's been a victim of abuse now. Fight and flight kicks in, her mental state goes up, and her psychopath goes up. And basically Akane goes like, okay, Shinya, don't just kill the victim of this crime. It doesn't matter that the system says that, her mental state is bad. She's a victim here. She doesn't deserve to be killed just because she's been abused. Which is, a very humane thing to do. Perfectly understandable. Got no problem with that as a setting. Shinya refuses to stand down, so Akane basically shoots him in the back with the stun variation of their guns. So he goes down, and then they resolve the issue. The big point being is that it proves that Akane is willing to pull the trigger. She is not a completely wet behind the ears rookie. She is willing to pull the trigger when she needs to. She's even willing to shoot allies when she needs to. This will become relevant later. The next roughly 6 episodes, according to my notes, are mainly dealing with the edge cases of this system. A good example would be, I believe, episode 3 is about a plant, a manufacturing plant that is off grid, completely disconnected from the system, but they have people come in monthly to do their psychopaths evaluations. And on this site, there is an individual who's basically used as whipping boy in order to relieve the stress of these workers because they're there 24 hours. The best analogy I can come up with would be, imagine sort of a nuclear sub, where you have these people who are completely isolated from the rest of the world. They only have each other, and basically it's decided that this one dude's going to be the whipping boy. Everybody's allowed to beat up on him, and they just transfer him around in order to let him get picked on and bullied and abused in this system. Eventually he snaps and starts killing people. No surprise there. And just kind of, that's sort of one of the episode of the day sort of setups that they have. It does touch on some Ghost in the Shell type concepts with like a VTuber who dies and then somebody steps into their AI VTube setup and then kind of takes over, and building up into the story, the overall conflict. By about episode, I'm going to say episode 9, 10, and 11 are basically a 3-story arc where a friend of Akane's is kidnapped, and basically it turns into the most dangerous game where her and Akane's friend and Shinya are being hunted by an old eccentric dude who basically wants to hunt people, like live people. And it culminates in the guy who is the hunter, he gets killed, and the mastermind, the sort of Moriarty of the story, is revealed. They run him down. Akane, this Moriarty character, and her, Akane's friend, are in a... doesn't matter. They're basically in a closed room, and the situation that is set up by the story is that Akane has her decimator, and the way that the gun works is that it scans people, and if they have a high psychopath, you're allowed to stun them. If they have an extremely high psychopath, you can shoot to kill. Judge, jury, and executioner, Judge Dredd style. And this Moriarty character is telling Akane, I'm going to slit the throat of your friend. Here is a loaded shotgun. It has 2 shells in it. Here you go. Here's a shotgun. Shoot me with that shotgun, otherwise I am going to slit your friend's throat. Akane then tries to use the decimator on him, and it reads him as basically having a psychopath of like 0 or 1 or 2. Basically an extremely low psychopath, so the gun won't fire because he's not considered criminal. And my problem with this scene is that it could work. I don't have a problem with the fact that Akane lets her friend die, or that the gun doesn't work, or like all of the different pieces could have come together. The problem is that it's an extended period of time where Akane is basically sitting there just pulling the trigger of this gun, going like, why won't it kill you? And it's, you know why. The gun is malfunctioning. There's 1,000 reasons why this system could be failing. You've got a loaded shotgun next to you. Drop the decimator, pick up the shotgun, shoot the guy. The other side of this I want to make also very clear is I'm not coming down on Akane because she failed. I know I mentioned that earlier, but like I don't have a problem. If I was in this situation, I've never been trained as a cop. I've never been trained as a soldier, anything like that. I would probably freeze in that scenario. I don't expect her to be Superwoman here. But A, she has been trained as a cop. She has been shown to be willing to pull the trigger. And she just completely pisses and shits herself this entire scene. Like, she's just incapable of doing it. And she wastes the 2 shots in the shotgun. Her friend gets her throat slit. Akane is now catatonic for like an episode or 2. It's an entire thing, but it just completely killed any love I had for the characters, because it was just such a poorly put together scene that basically even 2 episodes later, when the next episode after episode 11 or episode 12 is a flashback to another character, and it's her backstory, and then they come back on episode 13 to kind of bring it back together, and even within the story, they refuse to comment on the fact that Akane had a loaded shotgun. Like, it was not that she was powerless. She had the opportunity. She had the ability to save her friend. She just apparently didn't. Like,
Okay.
they constantly, because they constantly going like, you didn't fail, Akane, the decim failed. It was the decimator that didn't work. And it's like, yeah, I know, but you still had a loaded shotgun with 2 shells. All you literally had to do was drop the gun that you had, take the shotgun that you also had in your other hand, aim, pull trigger, dude's dead. And again, if I was in that situation, I would have probably fucked up. But I also wouldn't have sat there holding 2 different guns, firing wildly in separate directions. Like, oh, it was so frustrating. I literally did watch the show for
if
2
I
weeks.
may, if I may provide, or maybe a slightly different tack, slightly different approach to that scene and that situation. So first, while I could make the case, I'm not going to make this case because let's just assume that if she had handled the shotgun and everything would have gone fine, like if she had done what you're
Here's the
proposing,
thing.
right? If she was just able to do what you were
Sorry,
proposing,
let me
and
clarify.
she,
Just let me
yeah,
clarify one thing. I actually would have had no problem if she had that shotgun, take the shot and missed, or take the shot and killed her own friend. I don't have necessarily the problem with the fact that she failed that part of it. It was just really mismanaged. But yeah, sorry, continue.
sure. So I'm not gonna make the argument that logistically shooting a shotgun when somebody is holding a hostage, shotgun is not a pistol, it is not a rifle, it is the logistics of that is it's more of a spread, and you're likely to also hit the friend on top of hitting him because he was literally holding her by the neck with a knife to her throat, right? So I'm not arguing the logistics of that, but let's just assume in this fantasy world that if she does shoot the shotgun, it would only hit Makishima. We'll just assume that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the argument I would make, or the perspective I'd like to kind of maybe bring to this is, it's like you've already mentioned, it's already a high stress situation because that's her high school friend up there whose life is being threatened. But we also look at it in the context of the world that they're in, right? So the world that they're in, crime like this and these types of situations, they're not trained for those types of situations because when somebody's making open threats like that of something they're going to do, in this case the intent to murder, and you point a dominator at them and it's like, coefficient is under the threshold, no, trigger still locked type thing. Everything you've been taught and everything about this society that we are accepting as this society, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
those are the rules of this world, immediately comes crashing down. Like, it's like, well, he's threatening to kill her. Why can I not shoot her type thing? So it's not only like the friend trauma thing, and that's my friend up there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also your whole worldview doesn't make sense anymore, and you don't have time to rationalize that or try and justify it because you don't know. Like, he's clearly saying these things. Why is this still saying the trigger's locked?
Okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think from that perspective, there's that element as well that's being thrown in there. She does, like you said, she doesn't ultimately
Again,
handle one gun or the other.
yeah.
So like I said, she wastes the shots with the shotgun. They go off at 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock in terms of directions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she's trying to shoot for 12. So it's ridiculous that she actually pulls the trigger and goes that far off. Like, to that effect, I understand. To me, it almost would have been better if she just didn't. It would have made more sense if she just didn't pull the trigger at all.
Yeah.
Because then just like she's so shell shocked because of the trauma of that's her friend and because her worldview is falling down. That's kind of how I viewed the scene. My only take again is like shooting the shots in the 2 different directions. That didn't make sense. But her reaction to it, and then obviously then witnessing him slit her throat, and then she just goes absolutely catatonic. Yeah.
Again, it could have worked. It's one of those where the scene, I understand what they were trying for, but the execution is where it all collapsed. Because again, if she had just sat there with the trigger and like pulled, she goes to pull the trigger, guy has a psychopath of 0, can't fire, and then she goes, okay, well, he's bluffing, he's lying, I don't know why he's lying, but he's lying. Like, if she was just dead on, super confident in the system, super trusting, like, I would say that was actually slightly out of character for her, but at least as of that point in the story. But okay, fine, I could believe that, where she's just going like,
Well,
okay, gun is telling me
one quick clarification. When she first points the dominator at him,
Mm-hmm.
a number does show. And then when he makes threats, she points it at him again, and the number is lowered. So it wasn't 0 every time. It's
Yeah.
that's a small detail, but it technically would make a difference because if it just said 0 every time, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But the fact that she's pointing at him, here's the threat, it's under the threat level. He makes those statements, and then the number's lowered. Like that makes it even more chilling for somebody whose worldview is the dominator is judgment is law type thing, you know?
Yeah, and I guess my problem is that she wasn't. She very clearly wasn't confident enough in that. The scene for me would have worked better is if she had been almost egotistical about it. Like, oh, you're not going to do it. Gunn says you're not going to do it. I know you're not going to do it. Gunn's right. Gunn's not wrong. Sybil can't be wrong. And I guess for those of you listening, Sybil is the name of the AI that runs their society. But, Sybil, this AI, it says you're not going to cut my friend's throat. I don't know why you're saying these things and why you're behaving this way, but you're not going to do it. And then he does it. Like, I would have been fine with the scene. It's just the way that they set the scene up makes it so that Akane clearly believes that he's going to do something. She has tools at her disposal to stop him from doing something, and she has the training to react and make sure that that doesn't happen. And then she just doesn't. And then to add additional frustration on top of it, when the story picks back up with it, they completely ignore that part of it. It would be one thing if somebody sat there with like, you do know you had a shotgun, right? Like, why didn't you shoot him with a shotgun? And then if she had said like, I was freaking out and, something. But the story itself kind of tries to gloss over and be like, no, we're going to pretend that that didn't happen. It was the gun that was the problem. But anyways, I apologize. I know that I just went on like a 10-minute rant about that episode. There is more to talk about in the show.
No, I will say the build up to that moment, I did enjoy. I know he only existed for like this short 3 episode story arc, but I did enjoy the manhunt that goes on down there between the super rich mechanical billionaire guy and Shinya. And Shinya showing off like his skills and his wit in terms of getting the radio transponder and then figuring out, oh, there's a mastermind. It's not just this billionaire guy. It's this somebody else who ends up being Makishima. And then he ends up, putting the transponder together because the radar was in Yuki's bra because that was a test. Because is he going to leave Yuki behind or is he going to try and save Yuki? Which he ultimately tries and saves Yuki. So that's why so it's just like him trying to outsmart Makishima in the chess match that they had throughout the whole show up to this point. I found to be very intriguing and it was very interesting. And then kind of like after this though, it's like the chess match almost kind of ended. Like we just kind of shifted to a different paradigm as it were. And so that I think is a little disjointed to kind of criticize the anime a little bit. So moving on after episode 11, were there any other big issues or any other things that stood out to you in this first watch through?
Again, after episode 11, I really didn't have a lot of goodwill towards the show, so I will admit I got more critical of it, especially of the world-building type setups. For example, episode 12 is a flashback to the female enforcer and her history as a
Yayoi
musician.
and her musician, yeah.
Her being a musician. And basically, there were a couple things that left me sitting there, like when she goes to the re-education camp, the slogan there is "Work shall set you free," which is, I feel, a little bit too on the nose. I also have a note here that this isn't even fun fascism, it's boring fascism. Like, it's not even like an interesting dystopian future. Again, I'm being mean to it at this point, but like just a lot of it left me kind of going like, this isn't Alex Huxley, this isn't George Orwell as far as dystopians go. It's all just a little bit too white bread. Another sort of minor pick that I have is that in episode 12, you find out that in order to play music, you have to have a license in order to be a musician or be an artist of any sort in this society. Because, art can create heightened emotions and so on and so forth. later on, I believe it's in episode 15, we find out that they have an unrestricted media, that apparently the media is able to just report on whatever. And that baffles me, that they apparently found that they need to give permits in order to play music, but the same society is like, oh yeah, no, we'll let the news cover whatever they want. Like, that sort of disconnect where it felt like aspects of this society are kind of just thrown together to a certain degree, where there's not that level of consistency that I would have liked. Like, it would have made more sense to me if they'd been like, the media is trying to clamp it down, but the dark web is covering something. Also, to be fair, this show is from, I believe, what, 2010? Or early
2012 to
2012.
2013 is when the first season ran.
Yeah, so it's fairly early. It's also based on, I believe, an older work. I don't know that, but like, it comes in at that time period where you're kind of going like, okay, Twitter and social media were just blowing up, Facebook was just blowing up. Like, some of the ideas here aren't as fully fleshed out as they would probably be if it had come out even 5 years later. The other part of this is that the system as it exists, I guess, personal note, I work in cybersecurity, information technology security. So a lot of the like hacking things that they do, or like the get arounds that they have, are stuff that I'm sitting there going like, my team would have done this in the first 5 minutes of this society being put together. Like, you can't implement these systems without having people immediately go like, okay, here's the list of stuff we're going to hit this system with. And the problem is, like, the first 5 things that we would have done all work, and apparently this system has existed for multiple years. Now, that's a me problem. That's specific to me and the industry I work in, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to hold this show too much accountable for that. But it is one that it was giving me a chuckle, where I'm kind of sitting there going like, okay, the replay attack that they use on the helmets, where they just replay whoever has the lowest psychopaths in order to get away with committing crimes, is one of those where I'm like, you guys don't authenticate any of this. Like, you don't, like, these are things that we've resolved in the 2000s in regards to IT. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, this isn't complex stuff. These are basics. And then I guess, do we want to do the big final reveal of what Sybil is and so on?
Yeah, so let's get into that second half of the first season, because there's I want to get your thoughts on the ending, that big twist. Well, the big twist and the conclusion of the show, and then specifically, I had like 1 or 2 more questions. But what were your thoughts on that big twist? And then, well, you can describe the big twist, and then what were your thoughts on it?
I'm assuming you're referring to the brains in the jar.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sybil is a bunch of brains in a jar, networked together. It's definitely a twist. The problem is that functionally, it's not really any different than it just being an AI. Because, like, brains in a jar are just brains in a jar. Like, it's definitely a twist. Like, I'm not going to disagree with that. It's just that from a practical point of view, it might as well have just been a computer. The only difference is that they're brains in jars, and apparently all sociopaths. But that's also kind of one where I'm just left scratching my head and going, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. How is that any different than a computer? I guess they don't have to fear a Butlerian jihad. For those of you who get it. But yeah, I mean, it's a twist. I definitely wasn't expecting it, but I don't know. It didn't move the needle for me.
Okay, so then as far as then the ending of the first season, as far as how they kind of wrap that up, and then ultimately, like, the last scene, kind of what were your thoughts first, just on the ending and how they wrap things up?
I you know what, I'm gonna be honest, the ending for the most part worked for me. I will say that there was a line in episode 22 that really just left me sitting there going like, they have to do way too much explaining for it to make sense, because it's Akane goes, law doesn't protect people, people protect the law. And what she's trying to say is that, law is a human construct, and that society is a human construct, and that we all have to work together to maintain society. The problem is that is nonsense, as stated. But other than that, I think the overall idea of, basically Akane having to come to terms with the fact that she doesn't like the current system, but it's the best system that they've got at the moment, and that radical revolution isn't going to resolve her problems. so she's just gonna kind of go head down and make it work, was fine. I actually like that. I enjoyed her character much more in episodes 20 to 22 than I did in episodes 11 through 16, if that makes sense. Like,
She knew the truth behind the system, essentially.
yeah, once she kind of understood the system and she was acting in a cold, rational way, like she was being, when she had that character flip, I was much more fine with her than I was when she was kind of just a hypocrite. Like, that's how I felt she was in episodes 11 through 15 when they're trying to hunt down, I keep on calling him Moriarty, but the Moriarty character, and she's like, "I'm gonna kill him this time." It's like, you had a chance to kill him. Why didn't you kill him? You had a shotgun. But anyways, like I said, I'm gonna move on from episode 11.
She's learned a few things since episode 11. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think that the ending scene, the parallels between the ending scene and the opening scene of the show, it was a little eerie, it was a little haunting, right? In terms of just like the cycle repeating itself, because literally she is says the same lines that were said to her when she first got there, type stuff. So I thought that the ending, yeah, was just kind of, it was good in the sense that it's just kind of like, oh no, like the cycle's just doomed to repeat itself type thing in terms of just the system going about itself. But obviously now the difference being that she's just playing along to play along and then looking for that opportunity to make the huge drastic change to overthrow the system, as it were, is the vibe I got
Yeah.
from it. Did you have the similar takeaway, or did you glean anything different?
Similar takeaway. Again, I think one of my big problems, it was just a little too on the nose. It's raining. She says the exact same lines. They do the exact same thing. And it was one where it's like, I would have liked, give me a twist. Add a little lemon to it. Make it a little bit different. It was just a little too. I think that's one of the issues I kind of had with the show in general, is it was a little too on the nose in a number of ways. Like, it didn't have. I don't want to say it wasn't subtle, but it wasn't quite. I don't know. Yeah. It just, like the work will set you free thing and so on. Like, it wanted to be clever. And I don't know if that's a translation thing. I want to be clear. It could be that I watched the dubbed version, and it could be that the dubbed version just, in order to make the story work and make sense in an English context versus what was going on in the Japanese, they had to be more blunt with a lot of this. That could be the case. Again, I don't know. Translation is hard. But
Fair point.
some of it was just like, okay. Again, I really wanted to like the show. I do think it's very well animated. I would call it a 6 out of 10. It's just, there were a lot of things on it that didn't quite work for me, and it also is unfortunately in a genre I'm very familiar with.
And so all that being said, then my last question to you, because I mentioned at the beginning that there are 3 seasons to this show and a movie, I believe, as well. So that's takes place between one of the 2 seasons. I can't remember which. But so my last question to you, Steve, is, with that being said, it being a 6 out of 10, are you interested in watching, and will you watch the future seasons? Just to kind of see how they ultimately wrap up and conclude this world and this story, or are you one and done?
Honestly, what I think I will probably do is give season 2 3 episodes. I'll give it the 3-episode test and go from there. At the moment, I'm really leaning towards just bailing. I do believe, though, that this show does have potential. I think it plays with a lot of interesting ideas. It has stuff to say. It's just, again, unfortunately, it is in a very crowded field with a lot of giants in that particular field, and I don't think it necessarily stands up next to them. Like, it has fun quoting, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Philip K. Dick, and so on and so forth. Like, it knows its sources. It's very clearly aware of where it sits in sci-fi, in dystopian literature, and so on and so forth. I just don't know if it's doing enough with it for me to want to stick around past 3 episodes into the next season.
Well, for some perspective, we talked about it when we were reviewing Free Rin, and I was surprised to see it so highly rated. So the first season of Psycho Pass on my anime list is ranked at 248 with a rating of 8.33. For context, Psycho Pass 2, which is the second season, is ranked behind it at a 7.40. So the fans of the show do give it a slight drop off. And the second season is, it looks like it's 11 episodes as compared to the 22. So it is not as big of a commit. So maybe that means it moves a little bit faster. It's been a while since I've watched the second season. I rewatched the first season for this, and I didn't remember it being as gory as it was in certain moments. I had forgotten that, but I'm a little more favorable about the show. I think I rate it a little bit higher than you do. Granted, if you gave it a 6 out of 10, like I'd probably be it's maybe a 7 to a 7.5 out of 10. But what do you have any other closing thoughts on the show, or anything else you wanted to touch on that maybe I didn't get a chance to ask you before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I guess I would say that I think a lot of it is a me problem. That's just this wasn't quite a good fit. I don't think the show is bad. Like I said, I think it's above average in quality. It's just it was a bad match for me, which also I don't want that to reflect on you, Dave. It was a good suggestion. I definitely think this would have been up my alley. It's just not. It didn't quite hit, unfortunately.
That's all right. Well, I mean, that's like I said, the I think the fun in doing something like this is making a suggestion, maybe something that we enjoy that the other didn't watch, just kind of getting your takes on. That's the whole point. But you know, maybe somebody out there, has watched Psycho Pass and has even a different opinion, or thinks more highly of it, or thinks maybe even lower of it than you did. But let us know down below in the comments, if what your thoughts were on Psycho Pass. Maybe you've watched the second or third season, can provide some insight before we, you know, invest any more time into this particular series. I'll probably go back and end up watching the second season again, and then probably ultimately watch the third season. But we do want to thank you guys again for joining us. So for our next off-banner episode we're going to be doing, especially with the holidays, coming around and spending time with family and travel and everything like that. That's kind of why we're taking the time to do this. But to kind of tease our next off-banner episode, we will be looking at one of the longest running anime out there in the One Piece, and about discussing our journey through that story as we follow Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates. But until then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.